As we mark 20 years since the Bali bombings, in the next hour of the program, I'll bring you my special interview with the former Prime Minister John Howard, who was in power at the time of the Bali bombings. We discuss the emotion of his visit to Bali in the days after the attack, as well as the impact it had on relations between Australia and Indonesia over the years that followed. On the first anniversary of the bombings, I travelled with Mr Howard to attend a memorial where he spoke alongside the future Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono. In our conversation, Mr Howard reflects on that address by President Yudhoyono, which offered a powerful rejection of terrorism.
It was a magnificent speech by SBY, as he was widely known, the coming President of Indonesia. He spoke fiercely about the evil of terrorism. He spoke about the bonds between our two countries, and he spoke of the resolve of the Indonesian people to fight terrorism. And in a sense, he established himself as the tribune of peaceful cooperation against terrorism between Australia and Indonesia, and he captured the mood, because ever since the Bali attacks, our two countries have worked together so closely, and he greatly helped it.
I'll bring you my full interview with the former Prime Minister, Mr Howard, in just under an hour from now. Just after 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time, after 3 p.m. in Queensland. Let's get some analysis now. Greg Sheridan, foreign editor at The Australian, joins me now. And the 20th anniversary, Greg, of the Bali bombing, it changed Australian politics. It certainly changed Australia-Indonesia relations, didn't it?
It sure did, Kieran. So John Howard himself deserves enormous credit for the way he reacted to the matter. And the terrorists certainly didn't want the result which happened, which was that Indonesia and Australia grew ever closer. I got to know Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono very well. I interviewed him many, many times. He was as good a president as Indonesia has ever had. He also genuinely had an affection for Australia that was quite real. That certainly was a magnificent speech. And remember, he gave it because the president, Megawati Sukarnoputri, was scared to go and make a speech and scared to come out hard against the terrorists and scared to take a big international profile. SBY was not scared of any of those things. And it was the only speech you can say an Indonesian leader has delivered to an Australian audience via international TV. And he was a great president for Indonesia. He was a great president for Australia-Indonesia relations. He was an altogether good man, and we were lucky to have him.
Now, let's look at a few other issues today. The Russian atrocities, really, those missiles that have hit many civilian areas, including in Kyiv. Putin obviously in a corner. Is he closer to using nuclear weapons here?
I think he is, and he is in a corner. He's under more pressure than he's ever been, but it's way too early to declare victory here. Putin has enormous reserves of power. There are sort of three obvious things he can do. First of all, as the appointment of General Surovikin suggests, he can go Aleppo on Ukraine and just bomb the civilian infrastructure to bits. That's what he did in Syria, and that remains an option for him in Ukraine. Would lead to terrible human suffering, and even Ukraine must have a point at which resistance becomes very, very difficult if its power stations are wiped out and so on. Second option, he can just deploy a never-ending range of more people to the battle. Ukraine is fighting with every ounce of might that it has, and every man, able-bodied and lame, is fighting. Putin has hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Russians he could mobilise, and he has the whole nation of Belarus. Now, mobilising them will be difficult, it's dangerous, it's costly, there'll be a lot of opposition in Russia, but that's another thing he could do. And then the third thing is he could escalate via use of nuclear weapons, probably tactical nuclear weapons. The Russians have a very sophisticated, diverse arsenal of tactical nuclear weapons at very different levels of explosive intensity. It wouldn't yield him an immediate battle ground victory, but it would change the psychology of the relationship. And I don't know exactly what NATO would do to respond. I'm sure it wouldn't respond with a nuclear strike of its own. That would be incredibly dangerous. So, you know, Putin is in a lot of trouble, but I don't think we can count on victory yet.
Now, closer to home, our Chief of Army's made it very clear his support for the Land 400 project, those heavy armoured vehicles at the cost of $30 billion. What's your assessment?
Well, first of all, I think it's a ridiculous project, and a Strategic Policy Institute paper showing the only places you could use it are on the Korean Peninsula or in World War or something. It's completely insane. Any dollar that is not spent on dealing with the Chinese maritime challenge in the waters to our north is a wasted dollar in defence. But I am actually critical of the Chief of the Army. He's a good man and everything. I honour his service. I honour the Army. He has no right to be making a political campaign about a matter like this, which is before the government. The government is having a comprehensive defence strategic review led by Stephen Smith and Angus Houston. Everybody would like more money for their own pet projects. This is a terrible vanity project by Army, which has no relevance to our strategic circumstances, and it is most improper, in my view, for a senior uniformed person to say, in effect, to the government, give me this equipment or you are sentencing young Australian servicemen and women to death. That is moral blackmail. It's most improper. If the Chief of the Army wants to make that sort of campaign, he should get out of uniform. He should go into civilian politics. This is not in a democracy. The service chiefs don't get to run populist campaigns. By all means, he can operate through retired generals, and they've all been running around saying, you know, we need giant tanks that we haven't used for 50 years and so forth. But it's not right for a serving service chief to run this sort of public campaign, in my opinion.